in terms of dealing with a number of issues that have certainly come to the fore in the last, I would say, couple of years. First of all, there's a great need for legal advice surrounding land use issues to deal with the Holiday Farm fire and the recovery and the aftermath from that and the contracting that goes with it. In addition, over the last number of years, the county has become much more involved in different types of mental health and services through HHS that has exposed the county to a great deal of liability. So we are focusing on providing services around proactive legal advice, as well as working with the legislature and private insurance brokers to fill the gaps that aren't covered by the Federal Tort Claims Act through our federally qualified health clinics. The other thing that we've taken on this year in an effort to assist the district attorney's office is civil commitments. And so starting 2 or 3 weeks ago, we are now doing all the civil commitments and all the legal advice associated with the civil commitments. And that includes specialized legal advice surrounding the so-called 370 program or community restoration. And I can tell you that just in the last couple of weeks, the civil commitment has turned out to be a bigger commitment, required a bigger commitment than I would have expected. So it's about just that work alone is probably about a 5 to a 0.6 FTE, just dealing with actually doing the civil commitments and providing legal advice to our staff that process those. And we expect an increase because there's expected that the legislature is going to expand the definition of the circumstances that will allow a person to be civilly committed, and we expect that we will see an increase in civil commitments as a result of that. Next slide, please. And this is what I mentioned a few moments ago. We've had to do a lot of contracting for emergency procurements. We've had a large increase in our response to OSHA complaints related to the COVID situation. And the planning, providing legal advice regarding emergencies and planning, that involves all sorts of things, but primarily it involves getting access and providing access to the entities that need to have access to our property in order to respond to the emergencies. Next slide, please. This is what I mentioned is there one more? Oh, okay. This is what I mentioned just a few moments ago. I'll give you a good example. Right at the height of the fire, I got a call late at night where eWeb and some other folks needed emergency access to our property to use it as a staging area. Those kinds of, I will just be candid with you, a lot of the agreements that I entered into are the kinds of things that normally make me very nervous. It's literally a phone call and written on the back of a napkin and fired off in an email. But that's what you have to do in those circumstances. That's what the situation calls for. You get them the piece of paper that they need to get there, and we basically work on good faith with those partners, hoping that if something does come up, that we'll be able to resolve it. And you see, these are some of the other issues that are going along. The board, I know, is certainly familiar with this. We're talking about non-conforming uses, extending timelines, things that the county has the ability to extend, things that require the state to extend those timelines, and we're doing that on almost a daily basis. Okay, next question, or next slide, please. And this is pretty self-explanatory. It's what I mentioned before. We touch every single department in the county in one way or another. Everything from, I mean, I can tell you just like my morning this morning would be a very typical morning. I've handled a matter for A&T. I've been on the phone with Human Resources. I've dealt with the civil commitments issues. I've dealt with 370 issues. So that it is something that I don't think a lot of people have been on the phone with the clerk regarding redistricting. It's just an illustration of the fact that we are a general law practice. And as I used to, I tell my friends, I used to be a deputy district attorney, that they need to know one volume of the ORS, I need to know 26. So it's a little bit, it's a much more challenging role. And risk management, and again, I mentioned just quickly the insurance and those sorts of things. It is the daily job of making sure that The people we contract with have the appropriate insurance, that we're named as an additional insured. I in particular have been very aggressive about third-party claims and subrogation. There's really almost no amount of money that's too small to go back and collect after, so we have ramped up that part of the program. We've got recovered money that we paid out in workers' compensation programs, and the same thing for what I would call the typical things that you would think an insurance company would deal with, which is what we do. Car accidents, property damage, those sorts of things. And our workers' compensation program, we brought that in-house. We have a TPA that does some of the administration. We do that for a very strategic reason. We want a firewall between the employee and the processing of those claims, because again, that can form the basis of an employment discrimination claim against the county. So we've inserted that firewall. But I will say that the direct management of it has allowed us to reduce our costs, because we are in control of how those claims are handled and processed. And we are very aggressive in our the proactive part of that program to avoid those claims in the first place. Next slide. This is just, you've seen these from other departments. These are the kind of things that we do. And again, I think it just gives you a good idea about the wide range of services that we provide. And those are services, I think the key thing for the community to understand, the big difference in terms of bringing these programs in-house is that our people have access to legal services immediately. This isn't like a private lawyer where you have to make an appointment, whatever. They can pick up the phone and call. And I've certainly learned over the years that we have headed off many, many claims simply because they have that easy access. They're not worried about how many, if you pick up the phone and call a private lawyer, the clock starts ticking. Most lawyers bill in 1/10 of an hour increments. And so it's been very productive and working with them ahead of claims. Next slide. So this is these are the challenges that my office faces. We have some attorneys that are eligible to retire, and we have, over the years, I've tried very, very hard to broaden out and cross-train our folks, and also to bring along new, younger lawyers and train them across the board. Traditionally, folks have been a little bit pigeonholed into a specific area. For larger offices, for example, Multnomah County, Washington County, some of those offices, they have the number of attorneys to do that. You can have one person that does only one thing. We don't have that luxury. We don't have that luxury. So what we've done is to try and train up folks to replace the folks that are leaving. That could be challenging. For example, one of the areas that we have a great deal of expertise is in land use. We lost one of those folks a number of years ago, Stephen Voorhees, who'd been here for 20-some years. And then Andy Clark is now the primary point person on that, and he is on a path to retirement. So it's absolutely critical that we get that expertise in-house. And one of the challenges with something like land management is it is a very technical area. You cannot hire a brand new lawyer to do that, because that lawyer needs to have some experience practicing in the field. Another critical area that probably a lot of people don't understand is that we negotiate contracts with the state. That has been very challenging over the last couple of years. The state is mandated to provide certain services. They're unable to provide those services, so they contract with us to do that. And to do that, we have to negotiate these very, very long and complicated agreements that cover all kinds of things in terms of the amount of money, amendments, and most recently, with some of the service elements that have been added, the issue of liability. And one of our ongoing challenges, and I've recently addressed this by providing the last one there, which is the code and manual conversion, updating that, modernizing the language, and putting it in a format that makes it much more easy for citizens and staff members to access. You got a little taste of that the board did when Mr. Cheney explained the way that that's been brought online for updating our fees and other things that people have to deal with. And what we're doing there is, unfortunately, that's one of those things that tends to fall to the bottom, just dealing with the day-to-day issues. So what I've done is there's a person who's been doing contract work for us, and she's going to exclusively focus on that process, converting that over. Next slide. I think you get the flavor here. I would say that one of the other things that's tied into the previous slide about succession planning is we've built up a very good relationship with the University of Oregon Law School and have tried to bring clerks in and do work for us that allows us to leverage our time. But more importantly, it gives those students an exposure to what it's like to be a local government attorney, and also creates a way to generate interest in this. For a number of years, I went and I taught actually a single class at the University of Oregon on a single day, and the sole purpose there was to generate interest in folks becoming government lawyers and working in the public sector as opposed to the private sector. Next slide. Looks like I'm on time here. These are the types of things that we've built in. I know there's been a desire to do some metrics and measuring performance. That's often difficult with some of the litigation that we use, partially because there weren't very good records. When I came here, there was not a document management system. Everything was still paper. So it became very difficult to drill down and find data, but we're in the process of correcting that. But here are some of the things that we do that do provide some metrics. We are the point for providing responding to public records requests. I've made it a priority that we respond in the way that's set out there. Most of those claims are processed within 10 days or so because the records are readily available. We've created links on our website to help people because we get a lot of the same kinds of requests, and we redirect people to the appropriate place to get that information. For example, we get requests for vital statistics, or we get requests for divorce decrees. Those are not necessarily our documents, but we can direct the folks to those. And another one that we have put a big emphasis on is trainings. We do all forms of different kinds of training, primarily around our supervisors and managers. That period of time when someone is made a new supervisor and manager is the time that they are the most vulnerable. And I mean vulnerable in the sense of they've just stepped into a whole new role. They're not familiar with what all the responsibilities they have and all the potential pitfalls are. So we've created an online system through LEAP that is the sort of jumpstart process. And then we have honed it down to where there's more of a Q&A system. That was the request that we got from folks. So they get the basic information from the LEAP in the online session. Then we schedule relatively small groups for a couple of hours. We go through and make some small presentations, but it's really at that point more of an exchange of information, answer their questions. And it also provides, well, it used to provide, I guess it still does, so they can put a face with the name. I've tried to break down the barriers. Most folks are reluctant to call a lawyer. I'm a lawyer, I understand that, but it's a lot easier if you have had the opportunity in a rather informal setting to ask questions, have your questions answered, and be reassured that you can pick up the phone and call anytime. There's no question that's a dumb question. The only dumb question is the one that you don't ask. And so I'm very happy with that. And the final thing I would say is I am very, very lucky in the sense that I have a terrific staff. I have people who are willing to, younger lawyers that are eager to become cross-trained, that step into roles that they're not maybe entirely comfortable with, but they do it. They handle things from assessment and taxation to the clerk to litigation, and that's what you have to have in an office of this size. If we're going to provide quality legal services, we need to have people who are cross-trained, again, because we just don't have the luxury of siloing people and making them a specialist in one given area. And that's all I have. I think I'm on schedule. I want to make sure that we stay that way, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Dingle? Yes, Mr. Hazen.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Dingle. Thanks for the presentation. That was great. Just to follow up on the question that you responded to on workers' compensation, can you just share with us a little bit more about how those claims are going? Is that really a significant issue for the county? I'm just kind of curious because obviously there are lots of different functions involved there that your office is coordinating, and potentially quite a lot of money involved, as well as safe and happy employees, which we all care about.
Well, that's it first and foremost. So that's a great question. This year we've faced some challenges because of the statutes and some of the rules that the administrative rules that were passed by OSHA regarding COVID. And in my opinion, we've handled those very well. There's also been a number of complaints related to COVID that we've handled. OSHA has determined that we've taken care of those appropriately. What we have found is that just like in almost any other area where there's a potential conflict, we are on the side of the employee, I guess is what I'm saying. I mentioned earlier that we have a third-party administrator. They are basically the people that provide the negative information, if you will. Our folks are there to help people through the process. And what we do is we try and get people back to work as soon as possible. And that means that we're working with them, working with their physician. And the key there is that we are entitled to a reimbursement. We actually get reimbursed from the state for a percentage of those time loss claims if we get them back to work. So that's our overarching goal, is people who are injured is to get them back to work in a limited capacity at first, but ultimately the goal is to return to full capacity. And in relation to the cost, we were, I can't remember how long ago it was, within the last year and a half, our third-party administrator actually held us up as the outstanding government entity in terms of the cost per claim, when our claims were processed, and the metrics that the state requires us to hit. And they attributed that in no small part to the way that we've organized our program and the way that we run it.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Commissioner Bernie.
I just want to tell Mr. Dingle I'm so impressed he taught at the University of Oregon, since all I've heard from him is slander about the University of Oregon.
Well, to be fair, I did attend the University of Oregon Law School under protest, but I actually have a degree from the University of Oregon.
Other questions?
For the record, I am wearing my Oregon State tie today, just for the record.
Other questions from the committee? Okay. Thank you, Steve.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
You bet.
Thank you.
Okay. Next section we have is the section we set up for budget committee purpose and process. And Ms. Moody, I think you had a little bit of a high-level overview to kick us off with.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I did put together a PowerPoint, and you have seen some of this in orientations, but I thought maybe it would just be a good idea to go out there and pull the statutes that are related to Budget Committee. That's really why Budget Committee is formed, because we have some laws around it. And then just a little bit about our process. So I'll try and go through this here pretty quickly so that you have time for your discussion. Why don't we go to the first slide? So this is our current Lane County's overall budget process. And we'll send this out to you as well. But so this covers the pieces that we're doing internally with the budget officer, who is our county administrator. And the two that you see in red there are really the budget committee pieces. And so it kind of shows you the flow. I would add that the approves budget also includes setting the tax levy and making any revisions that are needed would be part of the budget approval. But I'll go into detail a little bit on these. So the next few slides actually show the statutes, and I cut and paste some of this, maybe just to show that there really isn't a lot in statute about budget committee. I mean, it says at the very beginning of this statute here, the governing body shall establish a budget committee. And then there's rules about how many members, how many years are the terms. But other than that, this is the statute that sets up budget committee. And then there's a couple others that reference budget committee. So the second one here, ORS 294-426, talks about that the budget committee shall hold one or more meetings And the purpose of those meetings is to receive the budget message and then provide members of the public the opportunity to comment on the budget document. And then it talks a little bit if there's other meetings, the noticing requirements and those things that have to occur. Next slide. And then it goes on to say that the budget committee shall approve the budget document, meaning the budget as submitted or as revised, and that the budget documents approved and the budget committee shall specify the ad valorem property tax amounts and rates for all funds. So that's the piece with the property tax setting. The blue down below, I highlighted just because of the comments on questions. So I'll actually address that here at the end of the slide. I'll pull that section back in just to talk about the question answer process. So next slide. So those were the statutes. This is Lane Manual that talks about county policy. These are board adopted rules where we identify the budget committee as a mandated special committee and indicate in that first paragraph there that the budget committee reviews, approves the county budget, limits the amount of tax, establishes the tentative maximum for expenditures for each fund. And this, some of you would have, or you would have seen this back when you first started on the committee, where we talk about when you meet, typically the first 3 weeks of May, the membership meets with statute, as does the term and the qualifications. So pretty limited here. So some of this, these next few slides here, you saw during your orientation in March. This is information directly from the Oregon Department of Revenue. They interpret budget law for us, and they do a lot of trainings on the different processes. And so I just thought I would quickly go through again the few things that I said are the purposes in statute. So phase 2 being the budget committee. And then they have, next slide. And I know that it's a little slow to respond here. Oh, this is again the counties, you know, where is it that budget committee is involved? It's in that budget adoption section of the roles and responsibilities of the budget. So I think the next one will circle us back to Oregon Department of Revenue. This is from one of their slides. What does the budget committee do? What is your job description? You receive the budget document, you hear the budget message from the budget officer. You need to hear and consider public comment. So there is a required public hearing. And then you discuss and revise the budget if needed, and approve the budget, and then approve the property tax rates. And these next few pages just go through the detail of those duties that I just described. So receiving the budget document, we have that pre-meeting with you a week before. That's when it becomes a public document. We post it on our website at the same time. And we also put one up in county administration. And next slide. Hearing the budget message, as you know, that happens on your first night, your first meeting. And then there's some description there that's also from statute specific to what a budget message has to entail. So that's part of what Steve will put in his message. Next slide. Hear and consider public comment. This is the public hearing where you publish the notice. We do that with the notice of your first meeting. The public hearing happens on that first meeting night. You have a public comment that you have held on deliberation night, but that really is an additional above and beyond the required. So we hold it on the day that we publish the notice. You can have timing and you could add additional meetings if needed. So discussing and revising the budget. This is where the county does put together the presentations that you've been hearing from us, and we have a question answer process. But related to what Oregon Department of Revenue says is they say discuss it, revise it if needed. You could reduce or increase the estimate of resources or requirements. And you may approve the budget at the first meeting, or it may take several meetings. So approving the budget is that last piece other than the tax approval. So establish and revision deliberation process. And then there's motions that are read that final evening where you'll approve the budget and we record the vote in the minutes. And approving the tax levy is also an important function for the budget committee. So Once the budget committee sets a rate for one of our tax levies, even the Board of Commissioners cannot change it. So the budget committee has that authority to set those rates. And so that's why in the motions, you'll see that we're going to say a specific rate per thousand, and that is what moves forward in the budget. So at that point, the budget committee is finished with their job duties. So here again is the Lane County process. And so I highlighted again for you in red. These are a little different than the first slide, in that I'm showing that the budget committee comes to leadership team, and we have those pre-meetings, orientations, and then the presentations and those steps that we take. So the two in red are the legally required steps that the budget committee needs to take. And finally, just a little bit on the question answer. So coming back to that statute that I highlighted earlier. So statute says that the committee as a whole can demand and receive from any officer, employee, or department information. You can question, and the budget committee can compel the attendance of anyone at a meeting. So the question and answer process that's had some discussion this year is above and beyond that, because we have a process where we have individual members submitting questions outside of committee time and not the whole committee. So in the past, historically, in the time I've been with the county, it's been used, questions about the materials that maybe there's not enough there. You have questions about what it means, or questions not answered during the meeting. So those of you who have been on the committee a little longer remember we used to have note cards sitting in front of you, where if you couldn't get to all your questions, you could write it down on a note card. We'd collect those. And that was just a way to try and keep the meetings a little more manageable in the time, but make sure that you got your questions answered as well. And then the 15-minute rule, which has been brought up. So this is that language. You all would have received this in your orientation materials as well. The Board of Commissioners has their own 15-minute rule that applies to them as commissioners. And so pertaining to budget committee members, this is where we've said it's the whole purpose of sending them through the county administration budget staff, limiting to 15 minutes. And in the event that there was the second bullet there, that a committee member needed more information, then that's what it would need to go back to the full committee for further discussion. So that is what I had for you. So hopefully that's helpful and sets some framework for you.
Thank you, Ms. Moody. Actually, I had a little bit of, if we could expand on this a little bit, because the budget process actually starts quite a bit earlier here. So is Mr. Morkowski on the line?
Yes.
So, so Steve, you're our budget officer, that's correct?
Correct.
So can you give us a little bit of overview about how you start your process, when this budget actually gets started, and kind of how you approach getting it up to that budget document stage?
Yeah, thank you, Chair and committee members. So, I mean, I'm always fond of saying there's never really a start or end to the budget process, but because it's something that's a living, breathing document. In terms of the development of the proposed budget, which happens each year, really January, and Ms. Moody can add to this if she feels like there are additional steps, but January is when the more formal piece of the process begins. We have our leadership team meeting with the commissioners and our appointed and elected directors and key staff. That happens usually in early to mid-January. And that's the point at which we talk very high level about local economic challenges, things we're looking at for the coming fiscal year. And we attempt to get sort of preliminary guidance or feedback from commissioners in terms of, things that they would like to see us focus on for the next year. We also invite budget committee members to that leadership team meeting. So that meeting has happened as long as I've been here, and I believe before I've been here for 7 years. I believe it occurred years in advance of that. We then have throughout February, then in January and February, departments are submitting their budget. So their department budgets, and so the department staff as well as our budget staff, are working together on establishing sort of what the criteria and guidance is for the department requested budget. So that's the first phase I think Ms. Moody touched on, is departments submit their requests to the administrator as the budget officer. Then in March, and I'm giving you very high level, so there's obviously a lot that's happening at the ground level of this. Then in March, we have individual meetings between the budget staff, the budget officer, and departments, where I'm meeting with the budget staff and our departments to review the department requested and say, okay, here's what you put in your budget. Why are you needing? And then we also ask for people to submit additional, if you have additional requests for your budget, then submit those with justification. So that's the process by which the budget team and the departments are working together to sort of understand what the needs of departments are. And then it's really in that mid-March to late April timeframe that the budget officer and the budget staff are making decisions around the budget. So deciding, okay, here's where we're at, here's what our forecast looks like, here's what our deficit surplus scenario is, here's the available resources we have. And so we make decisions really by, I think it's by mid-April, and then we're finalizing the budget document and the budget message by the end of April, and then it's printed and delivered to the budget committee. Does that answer your question, basically?
Yes, it does. And I heard correctly in there that there's the strategic plan, which obviously the commissioners are highly involved with, and then other elements that you included in there that bring the commissioners kind of oversight and influence into that budget process. Does that categorize that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, as the budget officer, and my job is to obviously work with departments and provide guidance based on what the board's priorities are, and then to ultimately make the decisions on the proposed budget. So that's what I've been hired, and what our budget staff is to do is to develop that proposed budget and then hand it to you and say, we've done the work to kind of the ground level work to give you a package that we think makes sense, that is in alignment with the board's strategic plan, the board's priorities as they've expressed in their planning efforts and throughout the course of the year in that leadership team meeting, and based on the resources we have available and what the needs of our departments and residents are. And then you go through your process and the board ultimately approves that. So the answer, I mean, that's why I say it's not a short window of time. I mean, really throughout the course of the year, the commissioners are meeting every single week, talking about various policy issues, wrestling with challenges and needs in the community. And we're also, as has been touched on, there are 4 stages of the budget, right? It's the county administrator's proposed, the 4 big actions, the county administrator's proposed, the budget committee's approved budget, the board's adopted budget, and then the supplemental process where 4 times each year, 3 or 4 times each year, we're coming back to the board to make amendments to the budget because we're receiving new revenue or we have other things that we're adjusting within the budget. So it really is an ongoing process, again, that we're very, I think we take great pains to align the proposed budget and all that work that we develop to bring to you with what the board is the governing body, the policy body for the organization has said its priorities are. So not surprisingly, you've seen in the last few years, things around behavioral health, around public safety, around housing and shelter, around equity, because all those things are in the board's strategic plan, right? They've said, these are the things that are the most important to us. So when we go develop the budget, it's pretty easy, frankly, to know, well, I know where the board is at and I know what the policy direction is related to that process.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the committee directed specifically at the presentation from Ms. Moody or Mr. Mokrowski's addition? Ms. Lasley, please.
This is really not so much directed at the presentations we just received, but to the overall agenda item right now. Those who served with me last year on this committee might remember that I raised some concerns about the committee's purpose and process. I would like to point out that there are 20 hours of formal budget committee meeting time this year, and each meeting has 10 committee members attending and from 4 to 12 paid county staff. I estimate that on average, each hour of each meeting has something like $500 to $600 of county salary and benefits sitting in the room. And this does not count the many, many hours that county staff spend preparing their excellent presentations. I have repeatedly expressed my concern about the efficiency of this process and the missed opportunity to utilize the skills and experience of the citizen committee members to contribute meaningfully. I am looking forward to some clarity about what this committee is supposed to accomplish and a much more streamlined process for accomplishing it.
Well put. Well put, Ms. Leslie. Thank you.
Mr. Hazen, do you have something to add?
No, I don't at this time.
Okay. Other questions for Ms. Moody about her presentation or Mr. Markowski? Yes, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Markowski, you mentioned four key points in the budget. One was the preparation. The second was the budget committee approval. The third was the county of commissioners adoption of the budget. Can you explain that? Didn't really get covered in Ms. Moody's presentation. After the budget committee approves the budget, what happens then?
Ms. Moody, Chair, and Commissioner Farr, Ms. Moody can expand on this, but the Board of Commissioners is then required to adopt the budget. So it's, those four actions are propose, approve, adopt, and then amend. Are the four actions throughout the year. So the board's role, the Board of Commissioners' role is to adopt the budget, and that's a statutory requirement to adopt the budget. And there are some restrictions around the amount of changes that the budget committee can make during that piece of the process to the budget, and then further restrictions about what the Board of Commissioners can change from approval to adoption. I think, I will just say my understanding of the state law there really is that, you hire a professional to do the grind, and it's not just this professional, but all of our professionals, but I have that title of budget officer, to work with all of our professionals to do all that groundwork, the detailed work, propose to you what we believe as professionals is a sound, a responsible financial document. And then you all, not just the 5 commissioners, but the 5 appointed residents who provide, some additional perspective, right? Who are not paid to do this job, who are not elected to do this job, but are asked to volunteer their time to do it, that you all come as sort of with an outside lens, an outside of the organizational structure and responsibilities, that you come in to sort of look into this process and go, does this look like it's good? And then it's the Board of Commissioners, right? So you're kind of that, stamp of approval or adjustment where needed, and the setting of the tax rates, so that there's some resident participation in the setting of the rates that's happening. To me, that's a really critical role for the Budget Committee. And then the Board of Commissioners ultimately, as the elected policy body, is saying, okay, it's our statutory responsibility now to adopt, right? To say this is the final document that we're going to put forward as our proposed budget, and then we will also amend it throughout the year. So I hope that answers your question, Commissioner.
That pretty much does answer the question, Steve. With the understanding that the Board of County Commissioners has the final approval of the budget, and that sometimes, not often, not always, sometimes the approved budget, the budget that's approved by the Budget Committee is not the exact budget that is adopted by the Board of County Commissioners. And one of the reasons that I was excited for former councilor, long-time councilor Chris Pryor to be a part of the budget process for Lane County is your many years, Chris, as a city councilor and a budget committee member, understanding the citizen role in the entire budget committee process. Now, prior to that, of course, we were with 4J for I'm not sure how many years, a dozen years, I think, with 4J perhaps. And so Chris, you have a lot of experience in the best way for the citizens to involve in the budget process. And And this is your first swing at the budget, and I'm really once again excited with your experience and knowing how things work, Mr. Pryor, for you to be involved, Councillor Pryor, excuse me. So, Mr. Mokrasky, thank you. You did answer my question, and with the understanding that the approved budget by the Budget Committee is not necessarily the budget that is adopted by the Board of County Commissioners.
I actually would go.
Commissioner Moody, pardon me, Commissioner.
Sorry.
Ms. Moody, will you please go ahead, and then I'll get to you, Chris.
Just one comment I would make is that I would probably say that it is never exactly what is adopted. That there are always some change, minor sometimes, but there's just things that have come up since the budget was originally crafted in February. Yeah, and so smaller technical issues. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Moody. Mr. Pryor, please.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words, Pat. Yeah, it's been a few years. I would probably say I've been involved in 30 plus public budgets, going back to the employment and training era and 4J in the school district. And anyway, budgeting is a very unique kind of thing, and people come at budgeting and their role on a budget committee with kind of different expectations. And I think it's interesting that the state law with regard to budgeting, which I've looked at a number of times, is really pretty sparse because they want to try to leave a lot of the flexibility to the local jurisdictions in terms of how far or how little they want to do that. But in having looked at the budget process now for 30 plus years, where it can start to go, not awry, but where it can start to get elongated and get to be more than it needs to be, is when the expectations go beyond the fiduciary and the financial responsibility of budget oversight. And by that, I mean, when somebody comes to the budget process, not necessarily with the expectation to look at the budget and its financial obligations, and is it correct? There's nothing fishy going on within the budget document itself. And that's why we have citizen members, to make sure the budget is not fishy. There's nothing hidden, nothing secret, nothing going on. And that's what the transparency piece is about, that the budgeted document itself can be viewed, can be seen, there's nothing hidden within it. But where it goes sideways is when somebody wants to go beyond that and begin to start getting involved in what I'll call auditing the operation of the organization, where I want to start not just looking at its financial operation, I want to start looking at its performance. I want to start auditing how it operates, either with an eye towards affecting that or influencing that or somehow changing that. For example, where a budget committee members might want to get involved in student-teacher ratios, where budget committee members might want to start getting involved in the operating hours of a swimming pool, where budget committee members want to get involved in the number and assignments of police officers, where budget committee members might want to begin to start setting the metrics for employment and performance. Steve did a great job of saying the county's working very hard to develop employee performance metrics, and I fully applaud that. I think it's wonderful, but it's not the budget committee's job to look at auditing performance. That's going into an area that becomes complicated in terms of what our role is. And so when it comes to asking questions, we should ask all the questions we need to ask to verify the financial reliability and prudence of the budget. With that responsibility comes the need to make sure the questions are appropriate to the budget and not to begin to creep into the area of auditing the performance of the organization. And it's just a natural tendency that people tend to have to want to start to look at how I can understand and influence the operation of the organization. I'm not a hired manager. I don't know how public works should operate. I don't know how many staff are required for certain things. I don't know how these things should operate. I'm also not an elected policymaker, so I can't use this as a role to dispute the policies that the Board of County Commissioners have set. And so I have to work within those guidelines. I'm not a professional operations manager. I'm not an elected public official. So when I start to ask questions that begin to look like I am questioning the operation or I'm questioning the policy, that we've now moved outside the budget process and we're now auditing performance. And I've spent a lot of time looking at performance auditing and what great things performance auditing can do, but that's not a conversation for this group. If we want to have a conversation about performance auditing, that's a great conversation to have, but we shouldn't get budget and performance confused together. And so I think our role could be pretty straightforward. We have to make sure that the budget is fiscally and financially sound and reliable, reflects the policies of the commission, and there's nothing hidden and everything is on the table and for public view. Beyond that, it starts to get kind of fishy as to whether wanting to start auditing the performance of the organization, or I'm just going to satisfy casual curiosity, which is great, but don't take my time as a budget committee member to satisfy just your curiosity. So I think we're doing pretty well. I mean, it's a truncated process, but it works pretty well. In terms of all the budgets I've seen, this one's working okay. It's working fine. We just have to make sure we don't start mission creeping into areas that just really don't fit what a budget committee's role is.
Commissioner Trigger.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that. I want to add the third layer because I'm appreciating this conversation. I'm agreeing with what's being said, and I want to bring it back to that. What can community members do to weigh in? And Steve Mokrahysky started about talking about the strategic plan, right, which is the Board of Commissioners that identify the priorities for the organization. And I also really appreciate that you mentioned a budget is a living, breathing document. A budget is also, to paraphrase Martin Luther King, a moral document. And so as an organization, we develop our strategic plan as the elected commissioners, but we are elected to represent people. And so those strategic priorities should come from the constituency, and they do. It's what we hear back from folks. And another great way that we hear from community, in addition to our own work when we're candidates and then eventually when we're serving by just being present and connected in our community, is all the many other advisory boards and commissions that this organization has. Those are the places and the ways for sort of everyday people to bring some content expertise and some time and to dig deep on issues and then help advise and inform us as we develop the county's strategic plan and priorities based on community need and lived experience of the people who are impacted by the policies. And so, I appreciate this talking about the very specific statutory and functional guardrails on what a budget committee member is, but I also want to offer that doesn't mean there's no opportunity or no need for folks to contribute in ways that are a little more policy recommendations and strategic initiative. And so I just think there are so many opportunities through our boards and commissions. And as a board, I think we're going to be digging in this next strategic plan to talk about the role and function and purpose and how we make the best use of that resource of community volunteerism on our boards and commissions. And also because by the time something gets to the budget, if it's a policy concept, no matter how valid or needed or important it is, there isn't the time to give it its due and really examine it and vet it and incorporate it into our strategic plan, let alone our budget. So I don't want to minimize community input to the budget process, but I do want to make sure that general community members know that there are ongoing ways throughout the year to build relationship with commissioners, to influence what our strategic initiatives and direction are, to recommend policy changes. And finally, I just want to point out that because it's such a prescribed and narrow lane that we travel in as a budget committee, this idea of vetting the budget and transparency really just means quite simply that. I think we're in such a political climate that people approach public process as an adversarial or as a I dare you to prove to me you're doing it right. And that transparency is a value neutral word. It means we're daylighting the process, we're making it available, people can see it, and we can say, yes, more than just these few people have seen it. It's been opened up and expanded, and we should want there to not be a lot of question or problem or needs for adjustment. We should want to trust that we've been through a process and we have professionals with a lot of integrity and leadership who've developed this budget that they've brought to us, rather than sort of approaching it as looking for the holes, looking for the problems, looking to prove why we can't trust this process and this budget. So really appreciating this conversation, but wanted to be sure I offered up the ways people can be more involved at levels outside of what this particular committee and process affords.
Commissioner Bernie.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say that if we could get the last two remarks from Mr. Pryor and Commissioner Trieger, I think that's, I've been educated by the two of you as a sitting commissioner in terms of both guardrails, focus, and yet the wider political and engagement process that's absolutely required. So I want to thank you both, and that's not token. I'm literally going to make a clip of both of your points, and in future budget committee appointments, that is going to be part of my orientation process to people coming on. Second, if I may, Dawn, I have to tell you, I don't go into a meeting without in my head calculating, okay, what is this costing? How much do these people make? How many hours is this taking? What would be more efficient ways to get, to wherever we're getting to? So I really appreciate that. I can't speak for you. I know it's sort of the elephant in the room right now is a bit of a frustration with Chris and you in terms of that. I don't know if the last two statements were clarifying or focusing for you as they were for me. But, and of course you can speak to that because you ended up making a statement, but not a question that could be answered. So you might want to, if you want to rephrase a question. I just thank you. For me, another mechanism, rightly or wrongly, my appointment, who is here, even though you can't see him, my appointment is so well positioned in the Springfield community, the service community, the business community, and he also has an entire career looking at numbers and having numbers make sense, that I wanted Mr. Wet Bruce not only to go through this process and provide his input as has been described, but also to help me educate our Springfield community more about what the county does, what the county doesn't do, getting more people engaged in the process. So that's another motive I had in making an appointment. And I appreciate the discussion too. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Hazen.
Sure.
I'll get you next, Bruce.
Yeah, I might just share a couple of things for this purpose. Mr. Mokrahajski, when I was learning about the budget process, I wanted to understand the budget awards that the county's been receiving. And as you pointed out, there have been a lot of them, and it's been a continual record of performance. The reward that we haven't gotten is something called the PFAR, the Popular, I can't remember what it stands for. Do you know what the award I'm talking about is? It's something like the Popular Financial Accountability Report or something like that. It's a more external facing version of the budget. And I think, I'm sorry, Mr. Pryor, I think it was really reading a little bit about that award that inspired some of my thinking about participating in the committee process. The Government Finance Officers Association also has best practices, which you may be familiar with, including performance measures, right? And I just read one sentence from that. GFOA recommends all organizations identify, track, and communicate performance measures to monitor financial and budgetary status, service delivery, program outcomes, and community conditions. And Mr. Pryor, I think if you look at the questions that I raised in this committee, they are completely in line with that recommendation from the Government Finance Officers Association. Mr. Mokrahajski's also referred to the additional perspective of the community members, and I hope to continue to bring that to this group. I don't feel like it's to the benefit of either the administrator, the directors, or the commissioners that service on this committee is a symbolic role. I think there's a very real diligence process that we all have a responsibility to participate in. In particular, if I may do so, our appointed community members. because we're coming in, as Mr. Mokrahajski pointed out, from the outside. We're not part of the budget process all year round. We're giving it a fresh look. We need things boiled down. We need things simplified to make any sense out of what's going on here. So I appreciate the opportunity to be of service. I hope I can continue to be of service here and really look at, you know, the effective use of public funds, which I know is at a very high level, as I mentioned in a couple meetings ago already in this county, a very high level, and that we can have more of that wider process that Commissioner Krieger referred to that focuses on effective use of public funds and is not dominated by sort of political agendas, but really just talking about effective use of all of our tax dollars. Thank you, Chair Golden.
Mr. Weber.
Well, I wanted to thank Commissioner Burney for those comments, and I apologize I'm not on screen. I know Sheriff Lodman knows I have a corneal ulcer in my left eye, and I basically can't see. And looking at a screen is really, really difficult. So I'm kind of listening, but I do really appreciate what Burney said, and I also specifically what Mr. Pryor said and Chair Trigger, in that, you know, sitting from the outside and, you know, Mr. Pryor's been through 30 plus public budgets. I've been through, well, this, you know, partway through the first one. I spent 44 years in banking, seeing lots of numbers and things like that, but this is a totally different process. And it's, like I said, I have a lot to learn on this, but these are the kind of things I love to do. So hopefully I will get there. I do apologize to everyone that I haven't been able to read as much stuff as I want to, because I basically can't see it right now. But again, I want to thank everyone for the tolerance on this. And like I said, this is a, in the last 2 weeks in particular, the amount that the directors have said has been really eye-opening for someone on the outside that really didn't understand how the county ran things. I had a great 2-hour conversation and lunch with Dan Hurley on Tuesday, and that was, he said that was just great. And I think the transparency and the openness to this is really big, because I talked to lots of people in the Springfield community in particular, and my comments, which before were somewhat uninformed, and hopefully they'll be much more informed now, is that, you know, I'm terribly impressed with what I've seen so far with how the county runs their business. I may go off screen again, but again, thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Bruce.
Yes, thank you, Bruce. Ms. Moody.
Just to go back to the PAFR, is how you pronounce the acronym, the Popular Annual Financial Report. It is actually related to the Comprehensive Financial Audit. It's taking that document and then creating maybe like a budget summary when we would summarize, just making it more readable, because that's a lot of accounting, balance sheets, income statements, if you've looked at the Comprehensive Financial Audit. So that's the piece of the, you know, that's the end game after we've spent the budget. The county did prepare one years ago. We didn't submit it. Yeah, that's the budget summary that Commissioner Brozovich is holding up. But we did prepare a PAFR. It's probably been 8 or 9 years would be my guess. We didn't submit it for the award. But so, yeah, I think at that time, we're looking to the policymakers to see what they're wanting staff time spent on. So I will just say that in our financial policies, the board has indicated they would like us to prepare the budget in a way that we will apply for the award for the budget. And then the Comprehensive Financial Audit has its own award as well. And so we apply for that as well. And that award is received by the county and has been for a long time too. So just additional information for you there.
Other comments? Mr. Pryor.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that Chris brought up the GFAO report, because I spent a lot of time working with that when we were talking about the performance auditing function. That was one of the baseline documents that was used as a building block in where you would want to go with the auditing function and audit committees and audit process. And so I think what it really brings up is the notion that budgeting and auditing are two different operations, and they're both essential and they're both necessary. And so I think what might be helpful would be for whether it's Christine or for Steve or somebody, they don't have to do it today, but to explain to us and to the larger community the auditing processes and functions that go on within the county. Because everybody knows that there's a budgeting process, but how many people really understand that there is also an auditing process that goes on that is actually reviewed, verified by independent organizations? And a lot of people don't recognize that auditing function. They don't really realize that counties and cities and school districts all have to submit to a pretty comprehensive GFAO approved auditing function. And so we don't have to do the auditing here at the Budget Committee because there is already an auditing process that takes place, but we may not be that familiar with it or how it works and what the process is to do that. So I'm glad it came up because the GFAO is a very highly recognized set of criteria for how organizations should be audited. And it's one that I believe in fully, but that's not part of the budget process. That's part of the auditing process. And we need to understand more fully how that auditing function works within the county structure.
Other questions, comments? Okay, Mr. Bukowski.
Well, I wanted to offer a couple things. And first, I appreciate Mr. Pryor bringing up the CAFR and our annual, because the question was asked, how do we assess the quality of our budget and the responsibility with which we manage resources. And of course, we get the GFOA award for the budget document, which is sort of how well, are we developing that document based on the national standards for a budget document. That's good. We also develop a consolidated financial report every year, and we have an annual audit by a third-party financial auditor. Moss Adams has been our auditor for the last several years. And so that is a review of how you're actually spending your money, right? Not the budget process is how are you proposing to spend your money, right? It's a forward-looking document. Here's how we intend to spend resources. The CAFR and the financial audit is how you actually did that. Did you do it in an acceptable manner based on all the regulations that are out there? So I think those are other sort of third-party public things to review as it relates to accountability and transparency. The thing I just wanted to make a comment, Chair, if I may, about this discussion. I really appreciate this discussion. I mean, I certainly sense some tension around trying to reconcile and resolve the role of the Budget Committee. And that's not always easy. But I think this is a really important discussion, actually, that we have not had in several years. My goal always as the budget officer and our budget team and our department staff is always to present you the best information and the best process possible. But I think, we are very open to how this process going forward can be more effective and efficient. It does take a lot of staff time, right? Our budget staff and our department staff spend a lot of time on their department presentations, on responding to questions, and we will always do that if it's of value to the committee and to the public. But if you're finding that maybe the presentations are they're not really where you want to go, you'd rather focus on other things, or you'd rather just not spend as much time on these years, you'd like to have it more high level. I just want to encourage you to provide us with that feedback so that for next year, we can deliver you. We have incredible staff, and we will deliver you whatever you ask us to do. And I will take certainly responsibility for any concern or frustration about how the process has gone, because that buck does stop with me. Our intent has been to provide you as much overview and information about what our departments do and everything. But I also appreciate that in doing that, we can be bringing you into a conversation about the operations of what's happening. And maybe we're spending too much time looking backwards when we should be spending more time looking forwards, and maybe talking specifically about the new initiatives that are in the budget. But I want to just offer that to you that I very much would appreciate feedback on how we can make this process more streamlined, use everybody's time as effectively as possible, and give you the information that's going to be as relevant as possible for the job that you have to do.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. And I do remember in the past, I don't know whether it happened last year with the COVID situation and, being new to doing this meeting virtually, but the budget committee has come back to us and at the end or near the end of the process and asked this committee specifically about the structure and comments or ideas and anything else like that. So the budget staff has taken that initiative to come to us for ideas. And it looks, I agree, this process is good and that we may get something new out of this. I would like to say that as a citizen member, my time is valuable to me, but I feel that it's also value as part of this process. And I want to spend the time to dig into this subject, to hear from these representatives from the different departments, and to understand this as for the multifaceted that I hope that brings to us. I hope that as part of the budget development process, that the expectation that it's going to get presented to this group and that department heads are going to come in front of this group, that this is part of being a human being, that it gives them a focal point so that they're doing a good job at the budgeting part. And Steve, that you're doing a good part of that as well. And I consider that to be of value. And I think it seems nobody said it yet, but it's also a bit of a recognition for these departments to see the looks in our eyes on a Zoom meeting, that we understand the work that they're doing and the way that they're coming forward to us asking, for a new budget that says it's acknowledgement that they're doing a good job for those that are. And, maybe for those where they get a few more questions and so forth, maybe it's a little prodding to, make some improvements in some different areas. I definitely agree with the comments I've made as far as the fact that I do not consider this committee to be a policy committee or a strategic committee. I do consider it to be very much, a cost efficient committee or an evaluation of that going forward, and accountability and transparency from a budgeting process. So there's my thoughts on the topic. Any other comments from the committee?
Chair Bloodman, just one clarifying question. Yes, I'm feeling a little bit of conflicting direction here, and I'm not sure who to direct this question to. So this is I guess to everybody on the committee then. I heard Mr. Mokrahajski referred to the budget as an intention to spend, and this is the budget committee, and that the comprehensive annual financial report is about actual spending. And that's not the concern of this body. But I also heard Mr. Pryor refer to the job of this committee being to sort of as citizen members, to flag up if there's something hidden or fishy in the budget, which seems more like the kind of thing you do with a comprehensive financial audit report. So maybe somebody on the committee can help me reconcile those two directions.
Somebody have a response for Mr. Hazen?
Does that mean I asked a good question?
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bloodman. I've worked on a number of budgets with, as a Councillor Farr, I worked on a lot of budgets with Councillor Pryor, and Councillor Pryor always introduced that level of accountability of the budget committee that did not dig deep into the operations of the organization. But when Commissioner Pryor, and I'm looking directly at you, maybe Chris, to correct me if I'm not quite getting this right, when you talk about looking to see if there's nothing fishy in the budget, that it's really the preparation and the presentation of the budget document that you're talking about, not digging deep to see if there is some malfeasance in the organization.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Moody.
I would just make one comment to that part of the audit is to look back to the budget and make sure that the budget was not exceeded and that there weren't any violations. So I guess I would say that that's how they tie together. That is part of the review by the external auditors, is they're making sure it all started with the budget, even as it was amended, and is that where we ended?
Mr. Hazen.
Yeah, Chair Lodeman, thank you, Commissioner Farr. So I would love to follow up on that line of thinking that you laid out. So if there is something awry in how the budget is prepared that the committee members might perceive, I would present to Mr. Mokrahajski that is something that could be helpful in these budget presentations. How was the budget prepared for the departments? And that's very conceptual. I know that's not necessarily easily actionable, but that does maybe, I don't know if Ms. Leslie, if that would potentially address your comments earlier in the discussion.
No.
Ms. Leslie.
I heard a presentation of the statutory requirement of the budget committee that is a fairly stripped down, simple outline of what it is we are to do, including what seems to be one of the major goals is setting the tax rate, which we virtually don't talk about at all as a committee. And we spend a great deal of time hearing about how the wonderful things that staff did last year, which I absolutely appreciate and appreciate learning about. And yet it takes an awful lot of staff time to bring that out and trot it out before us in its great detail. And if I didn't like it, what would I do about it as a budget committee member? Really, that's Steve's job. So really, I mean, I appreciate learning it and hearing about it, but I don't think it's the purpose of the committee as outlined in statute. And yet a major part of what the statute asks us to consider is to look ahead at what the tax rate should be, and we're not doing that. But we spend an awful lot of time hearing about how last year went. It was a rough year, and maybe we're making it rougher by making them organize all this information and trot it out before us. I think it's the administrator's role to acknowledge what they've done and help them do it appropriately, and that's great. But as I hear the description of statute and what we're supposed to do, I don't see an alignment. And it's a lot of everybody's fun.
I would say that what I heard from Ms. Moody and Mr. Mokrahowski were minimums for the committee. And not to say that we're not, that there's not a consideration in there of several elements of it, but I thought what I heard was that there was basically the way it's set out in statute in the Lane Manual actually allows for what it is above the minimum. So, but an excellent point as far as if we're being wasteful, but by going above the minimum, but that was your comment.
Well, and not just that, but the piece that we have a limited ability when 20 hours of meetings are presented in a 3-week period. Unless that is all a person is doing for those 3 weeks of their life, which as a citizen member of the committee, I don't have the luxury of putting my job and my family on hold to do only this for 3 weeks. If that amount of time and energy is spent in the meetings, hearing the presentations, then where really would be my effective use of my time and skills and expertise to make a difference in the decisions in the document during that incredibly compressed time, which is a discussion we had last year. If you want to take advantage of my skills and expertise, then I probably need to be involved earlier, like during the rest of the year. And that question was floated before this committee, and committee members voted or discussed it, and there was an electronic vote taken, and that was not going to be an appropriate use of our time. I don't quarrel with the use of my time. I'm here to be of service, but I question how useful my skills and expertise can be within a 3-week window when 20 hours are spent with me listening and having to make a decision at the end of that time. That seems like not a good structure. If I'm supposed to dig in, to dig in. And if I'm not supposed to dig in, then it's really wasting a lot of staff time to show me things that I can't do anything about.
Any other comments? So I guess the next stage would be to say, does somebody have a recommendation for a modification to the way we're doing things right now, or the way, either for this year, for the ongoing process, what little we have left of it, and looking forward into next year's process? Mr. Hayden.
I'll step out on a limb here and propose that based on Mr. Mokrahajski's feedback, this seems to be a worthwhile discussion to pursue. I also, as has been pointed out, since there are some different views on the committee and partly a function of different perspectives of commissioners and citizen members, and that it may be difficult to reach a satisfactory conclusion in the time remaining for this year's budget process. I, for one, I'm happy to just continue the process that we're on this year. And I would be more than happy to participate in off-season, I don't know what you call it, out of budget committee season discussions about the budget committee process that might result in some recommendations to the board over the next few months. So I'll just open that up for discussion. I'm not making a motion, but I'll just throw that out as a idea for discussion.
Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. That was similar to a proposal from last year where we had offered some time of the budget committee outside of this budget season. And if I understood correctly, that the budget committee could only meet during certain times of the year per state law, and that we were not allowed to have another budget meeting in different times during the year because we wanted to hash some of these things out. If that is still the case, then we have limited time to propose some changes, given that we are almost at the end of this particular budget cycle.
Ms. Moody?
I would say that the conversation about budget committee meetings that might be talking about the budget specifically, or funds, or digging into the budget, that's where you run into the state law issues. But you are able to talk about your meetings and your format and your process outside. That's why we have like the orientations that we've had. So that's definitely allowed. We just have to make it a public meeting. It just can't be about the specifics of the budget or making budget decisions.
Mr. Pryor, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I agree with the notion that we shouldn't change course now that we're this close to the end of the budget. So what we've got, we should stick with. But I've actually really kind of impressed and liked the notion of a budget process that looks forward as opposed to back. I think Dawn was really hitting something on the head. this gets back to my notion that there's budgeting and there's auditing, and auditing is looking back, budgeting is looking forward. And so if we want to talk about for next year's process, focusing a little bit more on what we're proposing to do and less on revisiting what we did do as a way of kind of restructuring a little bit, probably would shorten things. I hope it would shorten things, and maybe we could get through the process a little more quickly. But yeah, I like the idea of being able to say, here's what we want to do. This is the budget that accomplishes these goals, reaches these outcomes, satisfies these policies. That would be real helpful for me. So I like that idea.
Mr. Bernie, or Commissioner Bernie.
Hey, you can call me Joe. First, I think we ought to move forward and get this budget approved. Second, though, based on what Ms. Moody said, I think we ought to schedule a conversation, maybe in the fall, maybe after a summer of where we're not wearing masks every second of the day and where things open up and stresses aren't so high. And we really have a meaty discussion with, in addition to articulated frustrations, giving us time to talk about proposals for how to make those changes. I think this group, Christine, unless you tell me I misheard you, I think that would be awesome to have, maybe 90 minutes set aside, structured this fall to really have this granular discussion and really look at a better structure. Not that there's anything wrong with this one, but get everyone's inputs in terms of a structure moving forward. That's my thought. Thank you.
Commissioner Trigger.
Thank you. I like that idea. I mentioned at our Tuesday meeting that I'd be willing to participate in any kind of conversation around developing process as someone who's been both an appointed citizen member and now a commissioner. And one other thing, I just want to put it out there so it's not only in my head, that we maybe could do some advanced work on is, I think another thing I notice is that different departments, different staff have different resources, different comfort level, and different skill with presenting and with consolidating their information. And so it could also be really useful to come up with a little bit more of a template structure format that gets at what are the questions a budget committee needs to understand about the service delivery, the resources available, and the constraints that are anticipated or the opportunities that are anticipated. And then everybody from every department can be plugging into that same template, and that creates a little bit more of a level playing field in terms of presentation, as well as the amount of staff time that it would take to prepare that and keep it within within the confines and the appropriate level and degree of information that this committee needs to make the assessment as to whether this is the right budget to match with these priorities. And again, also keeps it prospective rather than retrospective.
Commissioner Bernie.
I just want to say, I think we agree. I think what we're doing is we're structuring some really good time where we can have some real good substantive conversation. It's less formal, but it's structured. And so I'm all for that.
Okay. Any other comments? Christine, I think we see a fall meeting of this committee, not to talk about budget, but to talk about budget process. So everybody seems to be nodding their head at that. So that sounds good. We should also open it up for other things that we haven't discussed as far as committee process. So is there any other things other parts of the process or other activities for this committee right now that anybody wants to discuss before we get into the deliberation piece? Okay, Ms. Moody, anything else you want to add to this part of the discussion?
Nope, I think we presented what we planned.
And how about our budget officer? Steve?
No, I'm good. Thank you all for the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's go ahead and let's take a 10-minute break Well, actually, we'll call it a 9-minute break and reconvene at 3:40. And please get back on time for that, and we'll get back started right at 3:40. Thank you all. like we've got enough of us back to get started. I wanted to check in to see whether people had sufficient time to review the minutes for the May 6th meeting, enough to know whether they wanted to go ahead and bring them up for approval. Raise your hand if you've had enough time. Excellent. Pat, have you had a chance to review the minutes from May 6th?
I have, yes.
Okay. So let's go ahead and take care of all the committee business, and then we'll head into the deliberation section. We'll bring Ms. Moody on to introduce that, but let's cover the rest of the committee business first. So let's start with those minutes from May 6th. Does anybody have any comments or revisions for the minutes from May 6th? Ms. Lasley.
There are a couple mentions in the minutes of really a typo. It says pellet shelters and they really should be pallet shelters. So perhaps we might want to adjust that.
I've seen that 5 different places, by the way, pellet shelters.
It really sounds very uncomfortable. I'm more uncomfortable than they have.
Okay, so there's one revision. Any others? Commissioner Bosevich.
Thank you. I just wanted to note for the committee that I've gone back and watched the committee meetings that I've missed. So I will be voting on these minutes because I have actually watched the entire meeting. Both of them.
Commissioner Burney.
Darn, I was going to suggest Commissioner Bosevich couldn't vote because he's missed everything. I'm sorry. I'm done. Forgive my humor.
Other things, particularly about the contents of the minutes. Anybody want to move approval?
I'll move approval.
Great.
I'll second.
Well, I want to be clear with the adjustments that
Approved with as amended for no pellets to sleep on. You got to sleep on pallet shelters. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those
It's palatable
opposed.
to me.
All those opposed, nay. Motion passes. Minutes are approved as amended. Any other committee business before we move forward into the deliberation section of the agenda? Commissioner Burney.
My wife wanted everyone to know that while we're doing this, she's harvesting some of her peony, what are they called? Anyway, yes, these. And she sends this to everyone and hopes we can get in the sun soon.
Other committee business. Okay, Ms. Moody, are you? Can you give us a little kickoff to this section? Did you have something?
You should have received some documents, and I think that Tanya is going to bring them up for us too, especially for our new members who haven't gone through deliberations before. Here we go. So this is the process that Lane County has used for, a good 15, 18 years, as long as I've been up in the budget office. So we ask committee members if there are any recommended revisions or proposals that you would like to make before the budget is approved, that you send those to me by 5 o'clock next Tuesday. And what that does is it allows us time to be able to check in with the department if it impacts their services or operations, or just do any analysis that might be needed. And we send that information then out to the committee before the meeting so that you see what everyone else is proposing. With those proposals, then the next steps here show the process that we've used is those known identified items for discussion. The committee looks to see whether there's at least 4 votes of members who would like to discuss it. So that can weed through them. The second would be once something has received those 4 votes, then it comes forward for more discussion and comments and needing to have 6 votes in order to be included in the approved budget. If we have any technical adjustments or adds reductions, then we will present those to you, and we will have one related to land management. The FTE that you heard were added recently need to be put into the 21-22 budget. They were added in the current year budget, but we need to get them into next year. So we'll have the details for you on that. So we'll want you to amend the budget to include those. If anything else comes up, I'm not aware of it at this point, but we'll bring it up to you that evening, and you would need at least 6 votes to include those in the approved budget. So once we've gone through those individual items, then discussion on the budget as a whole. If there's any questions, comments, discussion, and then if you could scroll down just a little bit, thank you. Then it's the motions to approve, and we have done these in sections. So taking on the tax rate, you'll notice in bold there, I did say the 4-H OSU extension levy is actually on the ballot right now. So if we know for sure that that has passed or failed, we'll know which way if we need to include it in the budget or not. It's not in your proposed budget. It would need to be added. We do have a special thing that we look at for Lane County is our transient room tax operational use. Transient room tax, according to Lane Code, is used more for debt and capital and some other specific tourism related items. But for the areas that Lane Event Center and Parks will ask for a certain dollar amount, up to a certain dollar amount that they could use for operations. We just have the budget committee approve that amount. So I'll have those for you in a motion, and then approval of the entire budget. And again, just remembering that it takes at least 6 votes for anything to pass and be approved. So we do also on the evening bring up a spreadsheet. And so I have an example of that here for you too, where we'll be tracking it real time as we go so that you can see as things are totaling up as needed. So this first page would be anything that we received. I should mention that we did not receive any community requests. So we did put the form out. I know there was discussion last year with the committee. We'd received quite a few, but we put the same form out. We did have a deadline back in March where we would have had time to go to advisory committees and get input, and we had established a little better process for you, but then we didn't receive any. So nothing to bring forward to you this year. I think this might have another page or 2. So this would be, first page would be where things are getting at least those 4 votes to discuss. If they come to this page, this is where the decisions will be made to add the committee items. Next page would be the staff, any technical adjustments, and then discussion of the entire budget. And it looks like this says 2021, but it will say 21-22 when you see it. Those must be last year's. So any questions on the process or comments?
Questions, Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Moody, I have a couple of quick questions. One is regarding item 5, motions to approve sub A, which is tax rates. There's a little bit of discussion as to that we don't talk about tax rates very much in the budget committee meeting, that it's more talking about what the departments have done throughout the year. What could we talk about with tax rates? I mean, the tax rates are established, and one time after the local option for jail and youth was passed, we did reduce the amount that we were levying because we didn't need to add as much. We didn't need to spend as much as we were authorized to levy. But what could we discuss as far as the tax rates are concerned?
I mean, we could point you to information that you do have, but it's the permanent tax rate is the property taxes that are received. So if you're looking at the general fund and the current property taxes, it's what the rate is generating. Potentially the levy, you're correct, we've brought it to the committee when we've actually had several years where they gradually stepped it back up. You'll remember we really had a lot of discussion that first year and then made a plan and eventually came back up to the 55 cents per thousand. So I think we would bring it to you if there was need to change or not levy the whole tax rate. We let you know in the document, like with the local option tax, that it is proposed to assess the entire rate. So that is part of your information.
And just a clarifying point on that is we really can't, there's an upper limit on the tax rates. We can't go above the limit on the tax rates. We can actually assess or collect lower than the tax rates, but that's not a regular discussion that we've had at the budget committee level. I was on the school board during Measure 5 cuts, so I realized that things were very different, 28 years ago than they are today. But today, I guess my question is there much that we can do about tax rates other than hear what we're doing and see if there's a chance to lower them?
Right. You're absolutely right, Commissioner. So our permanent rate is constitutionally restricted. And then the levy, of course, is what voters voted in. So it would be only if it was lower. You can't go any higher. So I think it was much different in the past. And I know in other states it's different, where they are actually deciding how much do we need in taxes to provide these services. That's not something that Oregon budget committees are able to do. So.
And the process seems more to me like an echo of the past time pre-Measure 5, about Measure 5 and pre-Measure 4750, which really inhibited what local agencies can do regarding regarding setting tax rates. Good. I'm glad that is. I'm glad I understand that fairly clearly. Then the other question that I have is actually that covers both my questions. Thank you, Ms. Moody.
Excellent. Ms. Leslie, did you have a question?
My question was in reference to the 4-H and OSU extension, but I believe it's been answered.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Trigger?
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Moody, can you share a little bit with us what, if any, leeway we have around transient room tax rates? And I don't know if now's the time or if, when we come back on the 20th, a little bit of history of the rates over time.
Sure. So the Board of Commissioners can change transient room tax rates. It is part of your lane code. So budget committee, if you're asking for budget committee, that would be different. But we can provide, I could provide just an overview history document in response to that question, maybe.
Well, I see that on here. I guess I'm asking what 5B refers to.
Okay. So that is the transient room tax that is already being received by Lane Event Center or parks under the current allocations under Lane Code, but they are asking, instead of using it for capital, which is what Lane Code identifies it to be used for, they're asking for it to be used for operations for parks and Lane Event Center. And so they will tell us like a maximum that they might need to use for the year, and so you'll approve that just as an extra step. Lane Code basically sets out transient room tax rates, allocations, uses, but it clearly also states that it can be modified as needed through the annual budget process. So
but what we'll have the opportunity potentially to modify is the allocation, not the rate.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Anything else, Ms. Moody?
Actually, Chair Woodham, another question, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Just an observation. My first year with the Board of County Commissioners, we were still doing some cuts, but Commissioner Bozovich, you were here when this deliberation process involved who are we going to fire? Where are we going to lay off? What services are we going to consolidate or discontinue? This has to be a relief to you, Commissioner Bozovich, to continually see a budget where we're not cutting.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr. Yes, it has been a relief over the last several years. Since we started the process of not using one-time money or reserves to pay for operational costs and set a structurally balanced budget. This has become a much easier process because we're not in the process of reducing. We've been in the process of doing gradual rebuilding, starting with the passage of the public safety levy back in 2013, and then getting some additional revenue streams through other sources, including some of the changes in Medicaid funding through the state and being able to expand our clinics. It's been a lot easier over the last half of my career so far as a commissioner versus the first 5 years, particularly that first year where we made a 20% real dollar cut in our budget from $600 million to $480 million year to year.
Thanks. And Chair Vlodeman, being the other grandparent of this budget committee, you would echo, I'm sure, Commissioner Bozovich's sentiments on that.
I do. This is and I mentioned it earlier, that if without the current process that's being used, the occurrences of the last 12 months would have been devastating to the county. And the budget in itself is a preparedness activity to prepare for the unexpected. And when the unexpected happened, the county has weathered the storm. And so that makes this budget process a whole lot easier. We're not having to look at a bunch of negative impact from the budget perspective going forward. Ms. Moody?
I should have also mentioned, remembering that we have newer members on here too, regarding proposals from the committee. So we would still, we will ask questions back if they don't follow policy, like finding ongoing revenue for an ongoing expense. The budget is also balanced completely, obviously, as required by law. So if you're wanting to fund something, then something else has to be adjusted. So we would be asking you where the funding would come from, which thing would lose funding in order to fund something else. So.
And Ms. Moody, so you're looking to get those emailed to you by 5 p.m. on Tuesday. Is that correct?
Yes. And then I will plan to send anything out to the committee probably by right around noon on Wednesday, and sooner if there's, depending on the number.
Any other questions, comments, or recommendations for the process? From a pre-deliberation standpoint, I don't have anything else. Does the committee, is there anything else anybody wants to bring up before we, Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Chair Boardman. In pre-deliberation, I don't know if there's any deliberation needed on this, but Ms. Moody mentioned that there were no community requests that have been received as per the deadline on March 18th. That does not preclude community requests coming through a budget committee member. We still have the ability to make requests at this point in time. So if a community member or a community organization has a request, then it's not past its deadline for this particular side of the process.
If you bring those forward, Pat, just make sure you've got a corresponding cut someplace. Exactly. Okay. Anything else for pre-deliberation? Our next meeting is, Ms. Moody, what's the start time on Thursday evening?
We have a start time of 5:30, and you will start with public comment. So you do have for that meeting the 2 logins. So let us know if anyone's not finding that information. We can send it to you again.
Okay, so there's the 1 login, and then we finish with public comment. We will actually close out that go to meeting piece and start up another one. Is that what we're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
And Chair Vlodeman?
Yes.
Is it worth noting, perhaps for the new committee members, that the deliberations do sometimes extend past 8 o'clock as they did last year?
I think that's an excellent point. This committee has a responsibility. Is there anybody who's going to have a challenge carrying that meeting later in order to get our business done?
When did it end last year?
It was
11
later.
o'clock.
And
Very late, 11.
Okay, just.
Okay. One more time, any other comments before we adjourn? Okay, meeting adjourned. We will see you next Thursday. Please get your information to Ms. Moody if you have any proposals. Thank you all.